Welcome to The Inside. With tickets selling fast for Spider-Man and crowds flocking to see Steven Spielberg's critically acclaimed West Side Story, this was the week the holiday season brought good cheer to Hollywood. As award season began to unfold, remarkable filmmaking was on full display in cinemas, and fans began to speculate about where the Oscars are likely to land next March. As another chaotic COVID year came to a close, we thought it would be useful to talk about how movies have always moved through the years and stayed vital by evolving, exciting, and embracing new technologies and other changes. And no one has a better understanding of the history of movie making than our guest today. Lenny Lipton is the author of the new book, Cinema In Flux. It's a fascinating 600-page history of how movies have been growing and exciting fans for centuries. Lenny is the inventor of the 3D systems that we enjoy at cinemas now. NASA uses a system he invented to drive the Mars lander on the surface of Mars. And finally, Lenny wrote one of the most beloved songs of all time. He penned the words to Puff the Magic Dragon. Welcome, Lenny Lipton.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
Lenny, it's fascinating. We talk every few years in an environment like this, and you're always up to something new. Congratulations on this book. It's hundreds of pages. It is going to be the reference book for every college library in the country, and any serious filmmaker is going to want to have this book. What prompted you to write it?
I was invited to give a lecture at the Paris Cinematheque. I spent a week in Paris and I gave 2 lectures and had a wonderful time learning about the Cinematheque. And I felt, oh, how sad it is we have nothing like this in Los Angeles. They loved cinema in a way that we just don't here. And they had a wonderful warehouse with over 5,000 pieces of wild stuff, beginning with about the 17th century up until now. And I had a wonderful time wandering through it and began to realize I knew very little. I was about 70 years old, and I knew my life really had effectively ended as being an inventor. And I needed something to do or I'd go nuts. And so I began to research the history of motion picture technology. And it just sent me on a course for more than 10 years.
Everybody, and I mean this sincerely, I have this book and others are going to want to have it because it's the ultimate reference book. I'd love to take you through 2 or 3 areas and just get your take on the importance of those developments. Let's start in 1659 and what's been called the Magic Lantern. What was the Magic Lantern and what brought it about? Because it's kind of the beginning of motion pictures, according to your book.
A brilliant physicist, Christian Huygens, he built one, a projector. He had this brainstorm, and he made what we today call a slide projector. It had a light, which was just a burning lantern with a mirror behind it, and then a glass painted with pictures written on it, and a lens. He used lenses that he had made for his telescope, and he began to project movies. And people saw it, and obviously it was such a good idea, people began to make these.
I want to take you through the Lumiere brothers were working in France in the late 1800s. I want to take you to 1928. William Fox spends $15 million, at that time a lot of money, to open Movie Tone on Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles, which would eventually become 20th Century Fox Studios to create talkies and movies with sound. How did people feel about sound when it came in? Did they immediately see it as something that would be fantastic? By that time, obviously, movies were a big deal. Everybody in America and around the world went to them. But tell us about that era. What was happening when talkies came along?
Jim, it's such a good question. I'd like to make it simple. But after Edison invented 35 millimeter film, he hooked up his invention, the phonograph. So he tried to have music come out of his movies. And it turned out to be very hard to make the two work together. And it actually became commercially of some success because of the Warners. And they worked with Western Electric. The damn thing about 35 millimeter was it was amazingly flexible because you could take the 35 film that had a film emulsion on it, and you could actually make pictures of sound on the edge of the film. And you could play it back, and they learned how to make it better and better. And by putting the picture and the sound on a single piece of film, it worked very well, and people make it better and better.
And what was the reaction by the industry when sound came along?
You've got to understand that most people in that business were conservative. They were making money, a lot of money, before the introduction of sound. So it wasn't an idea that was embraced. The big theaters, they were like 20 of the theaters made 80% of the money. They made these movies that were released with scores that were played with orchestra. And they realized that it was eating a tremendous amount of money. So the motive that Warner's had was to play back their phonographs, to take place of the musicians.
Just cut out the cost of the musicians.
Cut the cost out. And so for the first year or two or so, the most important thing wasn't lip sync. That wasn't important to the businessmen. They wanted to get rid of the orchestra.
So interestingly, what you're saying is the silent era was a highly profitable era for the filmmakers. Sound really came in as an opportunity to cut costs by getting rid of local musicians in all the movie palaces across the country.
Yes,
save that money.
Yes. And the thing that you need to grasp around this is that the silent movie was never silent. As soon as people began to project movies in vaudeville theaters, in Nickelodeons, it always had music. It had somebody playing a piano, or there were guys making, they would speak as the actors were being projected, saying things. They'd have effects. So it always had sound. And it was exactly what people had done with the magic lantern for over 300 years. So it was very much the same medium that occurred when so-called silent projectors started in about 1895.
So let's move ahead to 1938, another major transition. Two musicians named Mans and Godowski, they were hired at Eastman and eventually invented Kodachrome color film. Did the studios welcome color?
Well, these two guys, they were brilliant musicians. They loved movies. They saw terrible color movies in Manhattan and thought they could do better when they were kids. And they sold the idea to Kodak, and they hired them. I think they worked for 3 or 4 hours. They didn't have anybody in Kodak who had the idea they had, and they invented Kodachrome. And it was released first, I think it was 35, for 16 millimeter film. And about 36, it was introduced as slides for 35 millimeter. Like if you had a Leica or a Contax, you could, and the color was beautiful. It was gorgeous.
Well, you tell a great story in the book that they had to work in the darkroom and time the chemical process for the film developing. And since they were in the dark, they couldn't turn on a light to see the clock.
Right.
So they would time themselves by humming the final movement of Brahms' C minor symphony to know where the process was.
That's just right. In order to do the process, it had to be a certain amount of time for dyes to diffuse into the layers, and they couldn't see in the dark, so they sang their the classical pieces they knew, and that's how they timed it.
So what did the impact of color have on the movie industry?
Enormous. It was absolutely enormous. Kodachrome, it rapid very quickly in a few years. It went from 8 hours to process a piece of film to 30 minutes. And the color was beautiful. It was the first time there was such a motion picture product that you could make, because the color was the way we're looking at each now, or we see movies, it was beautiful. It was an inspiration, because the beautiful thing about 35 millimeter film on celluloid, the photochemical process, was very flexible. You could actually take blackened film and use the photochemical process. And if you were smart enough, you could actually add sound on the same piece of film and add color to it. And people in German, AGFA, made their own. And in the United States, Technicolor, very brilliant guys, learned how to make special cameras. They only built 36 of these cameras, and they began to make beautiful color movies. Did you ever see color movies that were made in the late 30s?
Sure. Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind.
Absolutely gorgeous. It was so beautiful. It was thrilling. What can I say? It was wonderful.
The book is called The Cinema in Flux, The Evolution of Motion Picture Technology from the Magic Lantern to the Digital Era, and it's available on Amazon and anywhere great books are sold. We'll be right back.
The Insiders is proudly presented by Cinionic. Cinionic's future-ready enhanced services and technology solutions provide compelling cinema experiences, peace of mind, and financial flexibility. Today, with more than 95,000 projectors installed globally, cinemas around the world trust laser projection by Cinionic to power the next generation of moviegoing. Visit Cinionic.com today and discover why theaters look to Cinionic to provide the solutions of tomorrow today.
Lenny Lipton is our guest today. He is the author of The Cinema in Flux. Lenny, the next era is the move to digital and 3D I'd love to talk to you about. You got a call from James Cameron before Avatar. What was that call like?
I think it was about 2003, and I get a call from a secretary. It says, "It's James Cameron." I said, "Who's he?" And she said, "He's the filmmaker." I said, "Okay, I'll talk to him." And I realized he was a customer, because he was buying our stereoscopic systems, because he was the kind of a guy he liked to go beneath the surface in the Pacific, and they would take 3D movies using our stuff and looking at it. So he knew who I was. And he said, "Can you do something like this with movies?" And I said, "Yeah, you send your guy here, or you come on down and I'll show you." Because we were making the Z screen out of these projectors, the TI projectors, that they weren't quite as good as they are now in theaters. But we had a little theater, and we were projecting beautiful 3D movies.
So Avatar comes out and becomes the biggest movie of all time. And we see 3D cinemas everywhere. And we see 3D movies everywhere. We still see all of Marvel's movies, many of the big action movies and spectacles are 3D. Where is 3D right now?
In, I think it was 2005, we made 89 pictures in Z screens. Almost all of them were in the United States, a couple in Canada, and a couple in Mexico. And Disney took the Little Chicken movie, a very bad, terrible, horrible movie, and they converted it into 3D, and it killed. It made money. So the combination of what TI did and RD did was the thing that actually put digital projection, it sold the thing. They bought it because it was a new gimmick by projecting 3D movies, and the companies began to buy them. The studios figured out a way to come up a mortgage so people could buy the projectors.
So here we talk about the industry, and we go from sound to color to 3D, and at every step of the way, you kind of describe a conservative industry that makes the decision either to save money or to thrill audiences and make money. So these are all financial decisions that move through, right?
I researched what a 35 millimeter feature film cost. And it was hard to get the right number, what a print cost. But I figured they were about $800 for a feature film. Well, if they could send a disc with a digital movie properly designed, it probably cost $25. I looked at several figures, but it must have been about, the whole theater was saving $1 billion a year.
In prints.
Yes.
By going to digital.
Yes, and they had to find a way to get the exhibitors to switch from 35 to projector, and they found a clever way to help them.
You have been involved in the space program. You invented the crystallized eyewear that allows the scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to actually steer and drive the Mars rover through the Mars landscape. What does that allow scientists to do, and how did that happen?
We had an associated company, a company that made technology for people like Boeing and people like that. And they got a contract with NASA so that you could drive the rover on Mars. And it was important to see in 3D because if you could see in 3D, you could keep the rover from falling into a hole. It sounds very simple, but you have to be able to see in 3D.
You're one of the few people who have written a song that every child in the world knows, I would suspect. You wrote the song Puff the Magic Dragon, and of course it became the tune that every parent sings to a child. And the royalties from that song helped you create a life to invent all the technologies and all these other wonderful contributions you've made. Tell us about writing Puff the Magic Dragon.
My first year at Cornell, I was sitting in a library and I read a poem, and I went home to Peter Yarrow's apartment down the hill on State Street.
What city? Where were you?
At Cornell. It's in Ithaca.
Okay, New York.
Yeah, and nobody was home, but we were all going to have dinner, and the door was open. And I used Yarrow's typewriter, and I typed Puff the Magic Dragon, live by the sea, and from blah, blah, blah. And I wrote for a couple of paragraphs. And Yarrow took it and he played a guitar and sang. And he later became part of this team.
Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Right. And so he set it to music, and I started to get royalties. And there were enough. I think it was about in 1965, I was getting about $7,000 a year. It was a lot of money now. So I could do what I wanted to do. I was able to live and shoot movies. I made 25 movies for about 10 years, mostly about the hippie story. I was very interested in that. It was my life. I made movies like that. The first 3 years after Cornell, I worked for Life, the magazine.
Right, and, Life magazine.
They traded me. I learned so much. And then I worked for Popular Photography.
Elon Musk named his Dragon spacecraft after your song. How does that feel when you see the Dragon spacecraft doing such magnificent things and knowing that Elon Musk was inspired by something that you did?
Well, the first thing I thought of was, I'm going to call him up and I want to go up in the rocket ship with him. But, by that time I thought, that's not for me anymore.
What do you tell everyone who asks you what the song is all about?
It's a story about saying goodbye to your youth. And the dragon gets bummed out, and another boy shows up, or a girl, and comes back to his dragon. And the cycle kept on going. And I believed that the ability to have a visionary about life, I thought that was very important for me. And I'll tell you something now, which is the damn strangest thing. It was like a lot of the people in my book, the 100 inventors who I talked about, most of them weren't trying to make a buck. They were so interested in movies and coming up color or sound or lenses. And I felt I was part of these guys. Their story was part of my story. It was almost writing a biography of my story. I became, Jim, I don't know how to explain it. I was a very lucky guy.
But you related very personally to the people that you wrote about in your book.
Yes, but I was now a historian. And what happened to me was that no matter how crazy some of those inventors were, I liked them. Some of them were very eccentric and strange. They had strange stories. Of course, I could only write sketches, but a couple of people were very interesting, and I would write more about them, like Edison or William Fox.
Of all of the people that you wrote about, is there someone that you identify with that you like the most or you'd want to have dinner with if you could?
Some of them I liked very much, or found them, in some cases, they might even be odious, but it would be wonderful to spend time with them. But I didn't hate them.
Tell us about one that you're fascinated with.
William Fox was a Jewish immigrant who lived on the Lower East Side, had many brothers and sisters, I think. And he was a guy who, as a kid, started to sell candy in the park and got arrested by the police. He didn't have a license. And he kept on doing more stuff like that, became very interested in movies. And he was one of the early moguls who started a studio. But he was the only one of them who believed that he could grow his business, through technology. It's damn interesting because the other guys were more concerned about keeping things on a level. But Fox saw a vision.
He was a disruptor.
Yes. He saw he could add color. He saw that he could add sound. And he could also add 70 millimeter. This is in 1920, 1930. All that stuff, almost 25 years later, they took those old projectors that Fox had made and they pulled them out of the warehouse and they turned them into 70 millimeter. We were able to shoot movies with those stuff that he started. But almost everything he tried failed.
So you've watched 300 years of history being made around this subject and writing this book. Are you optimistic about the future of the motion picture industry as we know it?
Of course. We're a wonderful human race of coming up with beautiful ideas. But if we're talking about movies, it won't go away because it fulfills something we need. There's something about this that teaches us. In some ways, it puts your mind to sleep. It's almost a narcotic looking at movies. And yet, wonderful movies tell us about who we are, like 2001, or all kinds of movies, some comedies that are funny. They teach us. So I believe in movies. I don't know what form it will take, but we're a wonderful species.
Ang Lee told us once, movies help us give life meaningful shape.
Yes.
And I love your take that it speaks, at some level, it speaks to us about who we are.
Yes, he is a wonderful man and has that visionary look. And it's a wonderful thing.
The book is The Cinema In Flux. Lenny, you, sir, are a national treasure. Good luck with the book, and please come back soon.
It was very nice to talk to you, Jim. It's a pleasure to talk to you. We got started with this a long time ago. What did we call it? The 3D?
Society.
Yeah, and then you evolved it. So I'm proud of you.
Well, thank you. You've been
I'm not kidding. Because you're able to organize something and have all these minds of people who can make something happen. And I don't know how you're able to do that, but you've kept it up.
Well, you've been an inspiration through all of this. You've been one of the people who never lets go. You are constantly creating something, and it's inspirational to the rest of us. You really are.
I don't know why. I just don't know why. I really don't know why.
Well, that's the reason we want you back. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thank you, Lenny. Our quote of the day comes from author Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote, Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and magic is just science we don't understand yet. Thank you, Lenny. Thank you for listening. Happy holidays, everyone. The Insiders is presented by Cinionic and produced by the Advanced Imaging Society in Hollywood. Our executive producers are Adam Castles in New York and Mike Piltzecker in Los Angeles. Brett Harrison produced today's show, and our technical director is Matthew Bach Lombardo. This is AIS.